Welcome to Coffee Break PD. In this series, we explore some basics about the Bitcoin blockchain. In this session, we will explore the transaction flow in Bitcoin, specifically focusing on how a transaction between two parties gets confirmed and then added to the blockchain. Let's get started. The purpose here is to gain a better understanding of how the controls within Bitcoin address the double spend problem, thereby ensuring that transactions added to the blockchain maintain data integrity. The process begins when the sender sends Bitcoin. It is then obtained by the recipient's address. Keep in mind all the security issues that occur here, with respect to keeping one's private key or wallet safe from unauthorized access. It is at this point where the transaction ID emerges. The transaction first reaches an initial node, which checks it against several conditions. For those familiar with systems audits, this is akin to system-based validation, or what used to be called input edit controls and validity checks. Specifically, each input is verified to ensure that the referenced output is not part of any other transaction. This, along with the other controls listed here and on the previous slide, act as a safeguard against the double spend problem. Another rule integrated into the system is that if a transaction's input is a Coinbase output, it must have a maturity of at least 100 confirmations, which equates to about 17 hours. This means that miners must wait approximately a whole day to spend the Bitcoin they earn from mining, serving as yet another internal control. The system also incorporates range checks and limit checks. A notable example is the 21 million maximum Bitcoin cap, which makes Bitcoin a deflationary currency. Why deflationary? People may lose access to their wallets because they forget the password, or their physical device holding the password gets destroyed. The Bitcoins associated with these inaccessible wallets are lost forever, as there is no central authority to appeal to for retrieving the password and regaining access to the locked wallets. Once a transaction passes these checks, it enters the transaction pool of a mining node. Here, transaction 7,957, a 35 FE, etc., is packaged into block 2 77298, waiting to be confirmed. This brings us back to the concept of recursive hashing and the Merkle root. Again, it is this Merkle root that facilitates simple payment verification on mobile and other thin client devices. This leads to the chaining aspect of the blockchain, where each block is linked to the previous one through a hash. For example, block 2 77297 is linked to block 2772296, and this pattern continues back through each successive block. Following all these links, we can trace our way back to the Genesis block. The difficulty is another key element in the mining process. As network activity increases, so does the difficulty. It is indicated by the number of leading zeros in the hash. For example, mining could be done when the difficulty was low by a laptop with a souped-up graphics card. Now it requires heavy-duty equipment, or mining rigs, to perform the necessary processing. It should also be noted that many nonce values can satisfy this condition. That is, the correct answer is determined by the nonce creating the leading zeros specified by the level of difficulty. The hashing process involves guessing a nonce, combining the Merkle root, the previous block's hash, and the difficulty level. This process is essentially brute forcing, repeatedly trying until the correct hash is found, signaling successful block mining. The process is energy intensive, and the first miner to successfully hash a block wins the reward. In other words, this work is costly. That is why this protocol is called proof of work. It ensures that the miner follows the protocol properly, otherwise they will have spent money on electricity and received nothing in return. Here we simulate what it's like for a miner to guess the nonce until the correct answer is found. The winning nonce for block 277298 is 29986471556. Back when block 277298 was mined, the miner was awarded 25 bitcoins. The reward halves every 210,000 blocks. Consequently, in 2023, the mining reward was 6.25 bitcoins. In the Bitcoin blockchain, timestamps play a crucial role in maintaining the integrity and chronological order of transactions. Each block is timestamped, ensuring a transparent and tamper-resistant record of when transactions were processed and added to the blockchain. In the verification process, other nodes in the network recompute the hash using the SHA-256 hash function to ensure the miner has accurately processed the transaction. If more than 51% of these nodes reach a consensus, the block is deemed valid and added to the shared blockchain ledger, thereby becoming part of the tamper-resistant record. Additionally, it's important to understand that a miner cannot simply create additional nodes to gain an advantage in the network. These nodes, while essential, do not influence the consensus process. They merely adhere to the established rules and verify the blocks. Unlike miners, nodes do not create blocks. They receive them from the miners. They also lack any voting power, accepting only the longest valid chain. With no direct incentive, nodes participate in the network voluntarily. Therefore, for a miner, creating more nodes would not aid in generating Bitcoin for personal gain, since these nodes would reject any fraudulent blocks the miner produced. Multiple nonces and the problem of orphan blocks. Since multiple nonces can satisfy the target hash, there's a chance that two separate chains might be built simultaneously. However, this situation is temporary. According to the 6-block concept, it is practically impossible to have a sidechain longer than 6 blocks. Typically, before the 6th block is added, the longer chain will prevail and the shorter chain will be abandoned. The transactions from the abandoned chain will return to the mining pool to be mined in the future. Economic incentives deter hackers from disrupting the system. In a 51% attack on the Bitcoin network, an entity gains control of more than half of the network's hashing power, allowing them to potentially manipulate the blockchain. This control could enable them to prevent new transactions from gaining confirmations, halt payments between some or all users, and even reverse transactions that were completed while they held majority control, leading to double spending. This is unlikely to occur, as it is more profitable for a hacker to mine Bitcoins and buy a Lamborghini, rather than attempting to defraud someone of their luxury sports car through double spending. Here are the references for the flow as it relates to block. Before we close out, let's examine 3 key challenges facing the Bitcoin blockchains. First is scalability. Visa, for example, can handle 10,000 transactions per second, while Bitcoin manages just 7. This discrepancy once led to the block size war, notably involving personalities such as Roger Ver, who was an advocate for Bitcoin in its early days. The block size war was a pivotal event in the history of Bitcoin, rooted in a fundamental disagreement over the size limit of a block. On one side were those advocating for larger blocks to increase transaction capacity and network scalability, while on the other, proponents of smaller blocks argued for maintaining decentralization and security. This conflict reached its zenith with the creation of Bitcoin Cash in 2017, a hard fork that aimed to address scalability concerns by increasing the block size limit. Ver was a proponent of Bitcoin Cash in the dispute. The debate was not just technical but also ideological, touching upon the core philosophy of what Bitcoin should represent and how it should evolve to meet growing user demands while preserving the principles of its original design. Moving on to the challenges of open source development, we find that, as with any project of this nature, Bitcoin depends on its community for ongoing maintenance and development. The collaborative nature of open source projects means that while they can harness a broad range of insights and expertise, but they also face the challenges of coordination and consensus. For instance, the transition of Bitcoin from version 0.7 to 0.8 involved the collective effort of volunteers who addressed and resolved major software issues associated with that upgrade. However, for companies considering reliance on such a decentralized approach, the lack of a single authoritative decision maker can present a risk. Decisions in open source projects are made collectively, and this can sometimes lead to slower response times to emerging issues and a degree of unpredictability, which can be challenging for businesses that require stability and rapid support. Lastly, we confront the environmental impact. Mining Bitcoin is energy intensive, consuming an estimated 91 terawatt hours annually, comparable to the energy consumption of countries like Finland or Argentina. This raises significant environmental concerns, posing a challenge to the sustainability of blockchain technologies. And now, let's share some closing thoughts on our explorative journey through the Bitcoin blockchain. Undoubtedly, it represents an innovative technology that has challenged the traditional status quo of banking institutions and the very concept of fiat money. In our next series on FTX, We will also look into how the SEC and other regulatory bodies are cracking down on fraudulent activities and money laundering within this space. Crypto's greatest challenge, however, may not come from the regulatory arena. Instead, its main challenge may be proving that it has utility beyond the greater fool theory, where one hopes to cash in before the music stops. The central challenge with cryptocurrency is that there is literally nothing when it comes to crypto. With Bitcoin, you do not actually have a tangible thing to hold on to. There are no digital coins or pieces of code to point to. Instead, your total holdings are a mathematical calculation of your ins and outs. Although this is part of the security, it alone does not provide economic value. For instance, unlike a simple convenience store, one cannot demonstrate how a single Bitcoin will generate a series of future cash flows. A counterpoint to this perspective is the actions of BlackRock and other financial institutions, which, by seeking to list a spot ETF for Bitcoin, could position the cryptocurrency as a form of digital gold. Although not explicitly labeled as such, this move indicates a recognition of Bitcoin's value as an investment asset akin to a precious metal. The pursuit of a Bitcoin ETF suggests these institutions view Bitcoin as a viable store of value, supported by its limited supply and increasing mainstream acceptance. This trend reflects a broader shift in the financial world, where Bitcoin is gradually being considered alongside traditional assets, hinting at its evolving role in the global investment landscape. However, it's important to note that Bitcoin's correlation to gold has varied over time, leaving the validity of this theory yet to be fully established. As we sign off from this series, we leave you with the following thought. Will future retrospectives view cryptocurrency as a hallmark of the speculative mania fueled by the cheap money era of COVID, or will it ultimately establish itself as a lasting store of value? Only time will tell. Thanks again, and see you in our next series, where we dive into the rise and fall of FTX. Let's explore some key takeaways from this discussion. The data integrity of the Bitcoin blockchain is maintained through controls and consensus. Each transaction is validated for authenticity and to prevent double spending. This necessitates that each transaction undergo a number of checks prior to being mined. In the mining process, a crucial economic aspect of proof of work comes into play, where potential hackers are economically incentivized to participate constructively in the system rather than attempting to compromise it. Miners engage in a resource-intensive hashing process, striving to add transactions to the blockchain. Miners play a critical role by packaging transactions into blocks, connecting current transactions to the previous block. Yet they cannot add a block to the blockchain without securing agreement from 51% of the network, which validates the block's legitimacy. The Bitcoin blockchain has some key challenges. Scalability is a concern, with Bitcoin's transaction rate lagging behind conventional systems like Visa. In the realm of development, the open source nature of Bitcoin introduces complexities in coordination and consensus, impacting response times to emerging issues. Lastly, the environmental impact of mining operations, due to their high energy consumption, poses a sustainability challenge, necessitating the adoption of more environmentally friendly practices. That's a wrap. This concludes our series on demystifying Bitcoin.